Hey everyone, welcome back. This is a prospective video based on test cluster contents. Keep that in mind that details may change in the future and that this is not necessarily representative of final release. I know I said I'd work on the Gauss Thermal Thunder Augment next, but that one is taking a little bit of work, so we're gonna look at a simpler augment today. Frost's newest addition, Biting Frost? It's a general Frost augment, meaning it will work no matter what abilities are present on his kit, but it requires frozen enemies, and the most consistent way of doing that is with this 4. So I would recommend revolving builds around that if you want to use this. The augment itself is actually really good, but unfortunately highlights the issues of Frost's dated kit. So a quick look at the augment first. Biting Frost increases your crit chance and crit damage against frozen enemies by 200%. These stat buffs are additive like regular point strike and vital sense. They scale off the weapon's base values and are not flat buffs like Covenant. So a weapon does need to actually at least be crit viable for this augment to really have value. Another point is this mod does not scale with strength. This is actually a good thing, because not only would a 400 or 500% crit chance and crit damage buff be absolutely ridiculous and extremely unbalanced compared to the rest of his kit, but it also allows you to use completely new kind of Frost builds that, surprise, actually uses negative, as in below 100% strength, and still get the full effects of this mod. When it says frozen enemies, it really does mean frozen. CC'd and stopped AI enemies do not count. 10 cold procs do not count. The only effect in the game that actually freezes enemies comes from Frost's abilities. So your only way to use this augment is by using his kit. No weapon or Helminth can activate the frozen requirement. There is one exception, which is Thermal Thunder's colds, but that's not really relevant here, so I'm not going to get into that. The easiest way to get use out of this mod? Have some range on your avalanche when you cast it. It really is just a case of more radius means more frozen enemies, meaning more enemies to slap that take extra crit stats scaling. But you probably notice a few deficiencies with Frost in the current meta. His cast animations are slow, especially on his 4. So natural talent is basically mandatory. His 4 requires 250 strength, which is higher than any other armor strip in the game right now. Single target strips like Ash's Shuriken require 143 and is permanent unless nullified. Multi-target strips like Nyx are even stronger and still only require 125% strength to full strip, but that's even armor and shields. Fire Blast from Ember on the other hand has line of sight check but full strips in an AoE so long as your heat meter is full and you have at least 100 strength. Zaku's Gaze only requires 200 strength as well to full strip both shields and armor again like Nyx's Psychic Bolts in an area. Caliban also requires 200 strength to full strip shields and armor and has no cap to how many you can place. And then there is Frost. 250 strength requirement, with a temporary armor strip and no shield strip that only lasts 8 seconds and a long cast animation. It's usable, but dated, somewhat painful, and very limiting on builds. Sure, you can find ways to get 250 strength without directly building for it, but these are all copium methods that you could spend on diversifying his build even more if it only needed 200. You have stuff like Growing Power, Helminth and Power, Pax Bolts, Power Drain from Parazon, even his Arcane Helmet that gives strength, but these all detract from the loadout in a way, with the build already being very full and then you're still trying to fit the Biting Frost augment on. And then there's another problem. If the enemies are full stripped, do you really need more crit chance and crit damage? Even at base steel path, full stripped enemies get shredded instantly and there really is no point to this augment. Maybe though it can find use at level cap where combining full strip and extra crit stats would really shine. So let's take a look at those Frost builds, shall we? This is a generic typical Frost Prime Avalanche strip build. You'll notice we don't have the Biting Frost augment on. I'll get to that in a bit. The premise is having 225% strength and then reaching 250 with Growing Power. This is the simplest way to achieve 100% strip on Frost without giving up too much, as all his stats are important on the build. You don't need any fancy conditional stuff you go out of your way to trigger, or buy expensive or rare gear. You could run max rank Blind Rage and Transient Fortitude to free up your aura slot, such as for Brief Respite, but I feel the further 10% efficiency penalty and 27.5% duration penalty can make the build feel clunkier to use. The build already only has a 7.6 second freeze, which is starting to get low. Transient Fortitude would cut this to 5.4 seconds, so it is up to you. A non-Snow Globe Frost revolves around his Avalanche, besides gimmicky setups that uses one augment, but this means Avalanche will be spammy, and you need to make a choice. You'll notice this build doesn't have natural talent. Well, you could drop Umbral Intensify for that and you'll get an 86.8% strip with Growing Power active, but massive crit buffs. That is actually viable on base steel path, but not for endurance scaling where you either buff the crap out of your weapons while bypassing armor, or you buff the crap out of your weapons while removing all armor. Again, removing most armor only isn't very practical. Yes, you have a free Helminth slot on this build. You could do some stuff like Ensnare or Breach Surge, since full strip means any particles are guaranteed one-shots, and expand the AoE capability of whatever weapon you're using if it isn't an AoE launcher. So how about we look at a new interesting build this augment allows you to do. This is Biting Cold Shatter Frost. The new augment is meant to go in the empty slot. This is not a build focus on armor strip. This is a build focus exclusively on weapons that can naturally slash. Yes, this somewhat limits your weaponry, but at the same time, this build supercharges slash setups and saves insane amounts of slots both on your weapon and the frame. Because we are no longer building for armor strip, we can just dump this stat. Just forget about it. Strength isn't important at all. This build actually uses his 1, so we can't get rid of it. You're either going to get rid of his 2 or 3 if you want a Helminth, depending on what you want. The range on this build gives his 2 a 7 meter wide carpet that expands in a cone out 47 meters in front of you. Pretty nice. 6 cold procs instantly, but you also have his defensive globe on a high range that can yeet enemies out of your area. Pick whichever one you want to keep. And his 4, 35 meter radius that freezes through walls, 7.6 seconds freeze duration on it too, which is still enough. This build can actually fit natural talent, and the 160 efficiency means we don't need flow. Your aura can be literally whatever. This build is just so cheap to run. Even power donation if you want as little elemental buffs as possible, which leads me into Freeze Force. It's intentionally unranked. Why? Because I want to give myself as little cold as possible. For your Helminth, you could take Nourish. These 2 abilities will let you make viral on a weapon that naturally has good slash. The unranked Freeze Force and low strength for both abilities ensures that the slash weight will remain high for better proc weighting, while still being able to get free viral and not putting it on the weapon. This frees up mod slots as well, and if it is a 100 munitions weapon though, or force impact internal bleeding, you could use a max ranked Freeze Force instead, as in that case IPS weight won't matter. Alternatively, you could put a Toxin mod on the weapon, and bring Spellbind if you don't have Prime Sure-Footed, or Airburst if you want to drag more enemies within range of Avalanche. Muzzle Flash is also viable from Mesa's Ballistic Battery for a massive AoE blind that ignores line of sight and follows you around pulsing out regularly whenever anybody on your team gets kills. That does require a mod slot for the augment though, which you could drop Stretch for and still get a 22.8 meter radius blind. Pillage is also viable if you want easy shield gate, because of the ridiculous range will get you a 37.8 meter radius pulse in the 1.9 seconds duration. And Frame Arcanes? You can go the usual Energize plus whatever Fire Rate Arcane or Arcane Strike depending on what you want to use for your melee or DPS. But if you take Theorem Demulgent, you can use a Gaze Pistol or any kick gun with Residual Malodor. This will give your kick gun Toxin damage, but it will also infuse Toxin into your 1. You can still hold 1 to give yourself a cold element buff, but if you tap it, it will now give a 6 meter AoE of 6 viral procs instead of 6 cold procs. Interesting niche, and lets you do pure Toxin kick gun setups with viral without having to mod for viral, or use Nourish Subsume. I feel this lower strength build will be extremely useful for endurance runs, where not having to run full strip opens up tons more build options than comfiness if you're running slash. It does restrict you to slash, but when have you ever been able to get away with crazy weapon builds like this? You don't need to build cold anymore on the weapon to make viral. You don't even really need a crit damage mod. The crit chance mod may or may not still even be needed at all based on weapon crit chance breakpoints. But this now means more slots for fire rates, banes, reload, you name it. There's an insane amount of quality of life on this Frost, both for the frame and what it lets you do with weapons. While I would much prefer a Frost Rework due to his clunkiness as I mentioned earlier, and his 2 basically being a better 1 but much worse 4, as well as his glow being relegated to defense strats or gimmicky true damage one-shots, but not actually useful in Avalanche setups, I do find his augment has its place in this update, even if it isn't in a full strip build like you would expect. If this is your first time watching, feel free to leave a like or, better yet, subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. 79.5% of you are not subscribed. I'll try my best to get new information out always as soon as possible, like I've done with covering the new war and the new coming augments. Stick around if you want to see interesting memes and builds on a nearly daily basis. You don't want to miss out on any of that, do you? That'll be it for this video. Thank you all for watching, and see you all next time.